In the early morning hours of December 15, 2011, a quiet stretch of Alberta Highway 2 became the site of one of Canada's most shocking crimes, a moment of jealousy, rage, and heartbreak that claimed 4 young lives. It began as a night of celebration, a birthday, a road trip, friends heading home for the holidays. But by dawn, police would find 2 vehicles on the side of the road just north of Claresholm. One SUV riddled with bullets, a young woman barely clinging to life, and 4 dreams extinguished on the cold prairie asphalt. This is the story of the Claresholm Highway shooting, a tragedy that revealed how quickly love can turn to obsession and how one man's unraveling changed 4 families forever.
In 1981, Prince George was a logging and railway hub, a small city surrounded by endless wilderness and lonely roads. It sat at the center of the infamous Highway of Tears, a stretch of Highway 16 where isolation made people disappear. Edward Dennis Isaac was born in 1958 or 1959, raised in British Columbia, and by his early 20s had already shown signs of cruelty and instability. But nothing in his background hinted at what he would become. His first known victim was Jean Mary Kovacs, a 36-year-old woman who'd spent the night of October 10, 1981, drinking at a local bar. Just after midnight, she left and told a taxi driver she was hitching east toward Jasper or Edmonton. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. Later that day, she crossed paths with Isaac, a meeting that would end in horror. He shot her 4 times with a .22 caliber firearm, mutilated her body with a knife, and dumped her remains in a water-filled ditch near Purdon Lake, about 40 kilometers from Prince George. Her body was discovered by a man gathering firewood the next day. The investigation was massive. 12,000 people were questioned, 1,000 formally interviewed, 300 named suspects. But there was no trace of Isaac. For now, the killer had vanished back into the northern shadows.
Only a month later, he struck again. On November 14, 1981, Roswitha Fuchsbichler, a 13-year-old girl from Prince George, left a house party around midnight. She was supposed to meet an older man at a gas station, but ended up hitchhiking when he didn't show. Edward Isaac picked her up.
By 1985, Isaac's girlfriend had left Prince George. Far from his reach, she went to police and told them everything. RCMP investigators finally had a name: Edward Dennis Isaac, and a witness. He was arrested on February 7, 1986, and charged with the murder of Nina Joseph. Under questioning, Isaac confessed, first to Joseph's killing, then to Roswitha Fuchsbichler's, and finally to Jean Mary Kovacs. His cold, matter-of-fact statements shocked even veteran detectives. He showed no emotion, no remorse, only curiosity about how long his sentence would be. In 1986, he pleaded guilty to Joseph's murder. In 1987, after psychiatric evaluation, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter for Fuchsbichler's killing. Finally, he confessed to the murder of Jean Kovacs, admitting that he and his brother Jim Isaac had raped, shot, and mutilated her body before leaving it near Purdon Lake. Jim could not be charged. He had been murdered himself several years earlier. Isaac pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for Kovacs's death.
Edward Dennis Isaac was sentenced to 3 life terms with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As of 1989, he was serving time at Kent Maximum Security Prison in British Columbia. He remains one of 3 known serial killers connected to the Highway of Tears, alongside Brian Peter Arp and Cody Langebachov, all men who turned the isolated roads of northern BC into hunting grounds. For decades, Isaac's crimes were overshadowed by the growing list of missing and murdered Indigenous women along the same corridor. The Highway of Tears became a national symbol of neglect, of women disappearing while systems failed to protect them. The stories of Jean Mary Kovacs, Roswitha Fuchsbichler, and Nina Marie Joseph deserve to be remembered not just as victims of a serial killer, but as part of the larger tragedy that unfolded along that haunted highway. On that stretch of asphalt cutting through forests and fog, the echoes of lost voices still ride the wind, and somewhere, beyond the lights of Prince George, the ghosts of those who never made it home still linger. This is Northern Nightmares, true Canadian horror. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the scariest roads aren't haunted by ghosts, but by those who drive among us.
In his later confession, he said he strangled her, then stabbed her in the heart to see what it felt like. He then dumped her body behind the Hart Highway, north of the city. Her disappearance was reported that same day, and a week later, 2 joggers found her remains. Police saw the pattern immediately. 2 women, both attacked near highways, both from Prince George. But without DNA technology or witnesses, investigators could only guess. Isaac, meanwhile, blended back into everyday life, drinking, working odd jobs, and quietly feeding the dark impulses that would drive him to kill again. By August of 1982, his final victim crossed his path, 15-year-old Nina Marie Joseph, a young worker from Prince George. They met late at night, but when Nina refused one of his demands, Isaac snapped. He strangled her with the cord of her own jacket, stripped her, stabbed her repeatedly, and slashed her body. To dispose of the corpse, he enlisted the help of his girlfriend. Together they moved Nina's body to Freeman Park, where Isaac posed her, spread eagle, tied to trees. Then he threatened his girlfriend, warning her she would suffer the same fate if she ever spoke to police. For 4 years, she stayed silent. By 1985, Isaac's girlfriend had left Prince George. Far from his reach, she went to police and told them everything. RCMP investigators finally had a name, Edward Dennis Isaac, and a witness. He was arrested on February 7, 1986, and charged with the murder of Nina Joseph. Under questioning, Isaac confessed, first to Joseph's killing, then to Roswitha Fuchsbichler's, and finally to Jean Mary Kovacs. His cold, matter-of-fact statements shocked even veteran detectives. He showed no emotion, no remorse, only curiosity about how long his sentence would be. In 1986, he pleaded guilty to Joseph's murder. In 1987, after psychiatric evaluation, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter for Fuchsbichler's killing. Finally, he confessed to the murder of Jean Kovacs, admitting that he and his brother, Jim Isaac, had raped, shot, and mutilated her body before leaving it near Purdon Lake. Jim could not be charged. He had been murdered himself several years earlier. Isaac pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for Kovacs's death.
Edward Dennis Isaac was sentenced to 3 life terms with the possibility of parole after 15 years. As of 1989, he was serving time at Kent Maximum Security Prison in British Columbia. He remains one of 3 known serial killers connected to the Highway of Tears, alongside Brian Peter Arp and Cody Ledgerbekoff, all men who turned the isolated roads of northern BC into hunting grounds. For decades, Isaac's crimes were overshadowed by the growing list of missing and murdered Indigenous women along the same corridor. The Highway of Tears became a national symbol of neglect, of women disappearing while systems failed to protect them. The stories of Jean Mary Kovacs, Roswitha Fuchsbichler, and Nina Marie Joseph deserve to be remembered not just as victims of a serial killer, but as part of the larger tragedy that unfolded along that haunted highway. On that stretch of asphalt cutting through forests and fog, the echoes of lost voices still ride the wind. And somewhere, beyond the lights of Prince George, the ghosts of those who never made it home still linger. This is Northern Nightmares, true Canadian horror. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the scariest roads aren't haunted by ghosts, but by those who drive among us.
It was a summer night on July 30th, 2008. Quiet, flat, endless prairie stretching across Manitoba. A Greyhound bus, number 1170, was heading west on the Trans-Canada Highway. Inside, most passengers were half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of tires on asphalt. Among them was Tim McLean, a 22-year-old carnival worker, heading home to Winnipeg after a long day. He'd taken a window seat, earphones in, the glow of his phone faintly lighting his face. What happened next, somewhere between Brandon and Portage-la Prairie, would become one of Canada's most horrifying crimes, a moment of madness that changed public transit, mental health law, and the country's sense of safety forever.
Tim McLean's bus ride began like any other. Around 6 p.m., the Greyhound made a rest stop in Erickson, Manitoba. There, another passenger boarded, a man named Vince Lee. He was 40 years old, originally from China, quiet, expressionless, carrying a black duffel bag and a large hunting knife hidden within. Lee sat near the front of the bus, alone. Witnesses said he barely spoke, occasionally mumbling to himself in Mandarin. But after a while, he moved to the seat beside McLean, near the back, a move that seemed harmless at first. The bus continued on its way, rolling into the night. Most passengers were drifting off to sleep when, without warning, Lee stood up. Eyewitnesses later said his expression changed, from blank to something unreadable, detached. He drew the knife and began attacking McLean. The bus erupted into chaos. Passengers screamed and rushed to the front. The driver pulled to the shoulder, slamming the brakes as terrified riders poured out into the dark highway, leaving McLean trapped behind. From outside, they could see Lee continuing the attack through the window. The scene was unspeakable. Several passengers, including a truck driver and the bus driver, tried to intervene, but Lee blocked the door, brandishing the knife, his face calm, his eyes distant. The RCMP was called immediately. It took nearly 5 hours for officers to surround and contain the bus. Inside, Lee paced calmly, knife in hand, speaking to no one. Witnesses described it as if he were in another reality, unreachable, detached from the horror around him. By the time police arrived, the highway was sealed off for miles. Armed officers surrounded the bus, keeping their distance while Lee moved inside, occasionally appearing in the window. When the RCMP finally entered the vehicle around 1:30 a.m., they found Lee standing near the front, knife on the ground. He offered no resistance. His face was expressionless. He was arrested without incident. The media quickly descended on the small Manitoba town, and the story spread across the world. Headlines were everywhere. Horror on the Greyhound. Attack stuns the nation. For those who had been on the bus, the trauma was life-altering. Some were treated for shock. Others never took public transport again. When Vince Lee first appeared in court, his demeanor was quiet, withdrawn. Reporters noted that he seemed confused, disoriented. Over the following months, psychiatrists examined him and discovered that Lee had been living with untreated schizophrenia. He told doctors that he'd been hearing voices that told him Tim McLean was an evil force who had to be destroyed. It was clear that Lee believed he was acting under divine command.
In 2009, the court found him not criminally responsible for the killing due to mental illness. The verdict, NCR, meant that Lee would not go to prison, but instead be confined to a secure psychiatric facility until doctors deemed him safe. For many Canadians, that decision was controversial. The public struggled to balance compassion for mental illness with anger and grief over what had been done. Tim McLean's mother, Carol, became a voice for victims' rights. She argued that mental illness shouldn't erase accountability and that those found NCR should never be fully released. Her grief and her courage gave a human face to an almost unthinkable tragedy.
Vince Lee was treated at the Selkirk Mental Health Center for several years. Doctors reported steady improvement. The medication, structure, and therapy began to quiet the voices. In 2015, under close supervision, he was granted supervised day trips into the community. By 2017, he was granted full release. Under Canadian law, he was allowed to live freely, under a new name, Will Baker. The decision was controversial, and it reopened old wounds. For Tim McLean's family, no treatment could undo their loss. But others saw Lee's recovery as proof of how deeply mental illness can distort reality, and how fragile the line between sanity and catastrophe can be. Tim McLean's story sparked changes in Canada's mental health system and in laws governing those found not criminally responsible. In 2014, the Not Criminally Responsible Reform Act was passed, allowing review boards to consider public safety as a primary factor before granting release. Today, the stretch of highway between Portage la Prairie and Brandon looks the same as it did that summer night. Flat, quiet, endless. Buses still run that route, and every passenger who boards does so with the silent trust that they'll make it safely home. For the survivors, the first responders, and the McLean family, that trust was shattered in one horrific moment. Tim McLean was remembered as kind, energetic, and full of life, a son, a friend, and a man whose future was stolen by madness on an open prairie road. As Canadians, the story forces us to confront a truth that's both terrifying and tragic. Evil isn't always deliberate. Sometimes it's the absence of control, the collapse of a mind no one saw unraveling until it was far too late.
This is the story of Tim McLean and the night that forever changed how Canada talks about mental health, safety, and forgiveness. I'm Stefan, and this is Northern Nightmares, true Canadian horror. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not all monsters hide in the dark. Some ride the bus.
In the early morning hours of December 15, 2011, a quiet stretch of Alberta Highway 2 became the site of one of Canada's most shocking crimes, a moment of jealousy, rage, and heartbreak that claimed 4 young lives. It began as a night of celebration, a birthday, a road trip, friends heading home for the holidays. But by dawn, police would find 2 vehicles on the side of the road just north of Claire's home. One SUV riddled with bullets, a young woman barely clinging to life, and 4 dreams extinguished on the cold prairie asphalt. This is the story of the Clairsholm Highway shooting, a tragedy that revealed how quickly love can turn to obsession and how one man's unraveling changed 4 families forever.
It all began in Lethbridge, Alberta, a close-knit community where 21-year-old Derek Jensen and Tabitha Steppel first met. The 2 were young, ambitious, and inseparable at first. Jensen, a paramedic student with quiet confidence, and Steppel, outgoing and full of life. They met in a downtown nightclub, fell quickly into a relationship, and soon moved into a basement suite together. But as often happens with young love, tension started to grow.
By Halloween of 2011, the relationship had ended, though they still shared the same space, navigating the uncomfortable limbo between love and loss. There had been no police reports, no signs of violence, no hint of the storm that was coming. Friends described Jensen as quiet, loyal, even kind. But those same friends would later recall something changing in his demeanor after the breakup, an undercurrent of bitterness, a growing darkness that no one recognized in time.
On December 14, 2011, Jensen's friends took him out to a pub in Lethbridge, a night to unwind, to lift his spirits. Inside that same pub, fate intervened. Sitting just a few tables away was his ex-girlfriend, Tabitha Steppel, celebrating with friends. Tanner Craswell and Mitch McLean, both 20 and 22, talented baseball players for the Lethbridge Bulls, and Shayna Conway, Tanner's girlfriend and Tabitha's co-worker. What happened next was brief but explosive. Jensen saw Steppel, laughing, smiling, enjoying the night, and something inside him snapped. Witnesses said he confronted her, shoving her chair and sparking a heated argument before storming out. His friends tried to calm him down, urging him to let it go. Jensen told them he was heading home, but instead, he began making phone calls, one after another, to Steppel. His final message to her was chilling. "This night's not going to end well for you. I hope you know that."
Meanwhile, Steppel, Conway, Craswell, and McLean left Lethbridge around midnight. They had an early morning flight out of Calgary, a 5 a.m. departure back to Prince Edward Island to spend Christmas with family. They stopped briefly in Clarsholm around 3 a.m., pulling into a 7-Eleven for snacks and coffee. Surveillance cameras captured them inside, smiling, unaware that Derek Jensen's green Pontiac Sunfire had pulled in just moments later. He didn't confront them, he simply waited. When they drove north again on Highway 2, Jensen followed. Somewhere between Clarsholm and Staveley, he rammed his car into the back of their Ford Escape. Startled, the group pulled over. Shayna Conway got out to see what had happened, thinking it was a stranger, maybe a drunk driver. But as she approached the other car, Jensen stepped out, raised a 9mm handgun, and opened fire. He shot Conway 3 times, then turned toward the SUV. Inside, Tabitha Steppel, Tanner Craswell, and Mitch McLean had no chance to react. Jensen fired multiple rounds into the vehicle, killing Tabitha and Tanner instantly. Mitch, wounded but alive, managed to crawl out of the SUV and stumble toward the highway before collapsing. Moments later, Derek Jensen turned the gun on himself.
When police arrived, the scene was almost surreal. The 2 vehicles illuminated by flashing lights under the vast prairie sky. 4 young lives scattered in tragedy. Shayna Conway, though gravely wounded, survived. She was the only one left to tell what happened, the only voice that could piece together the final moments of her friends. News of the shooting sent shockwaves across the country. In Lethbridge, teammates and classmates gathered in silence at the Bulls' home field. Flowers, baseballs, and handwritten notes covered the dugout steps. Across Prince Edward Island, communities mourned the loss of 2 local heroes who had gone west chasing their dreams. In the following weeks, police pieced together Jensen's final hours. The anger, the calls, the pursuit. There were no drugs, no prior violence, no warning signs. Just a young man whose heartbreak turned to obsession and ended in unthinkable violence.
The Clarsholm Highway shooting left a scar on Alberta's landscape, a reminder of how fragile life can be, how quickly love can twist into something deadly when obsession takes hold. For the families of Tabitha Steppel, Tanner Craswell, and Mitch McLean, the years that followed were filled with grief and what-ifs. For Shayna Conway, survival meant carrying the memory of that night, a story of resilience born from unimaginable loss.
In their honor, the Lethbridge Bulls retired the jerseys of Tanner and Mitch, and scholarships were created in their names. Their legacy now lives not in tragedy, but in the dreams of young athletes who will never forget their story. As for Derek Jensen, his actions remain a haunting reminder. Jealousy and control can be as deadly as any weapon, and the smallest moment, a confrontation, a choice, a turn of the wheel, can unravel everything. On that quiet highway outside Clairsholm, under a sky filled with stars, 4 young people crossed paths one final time, and Canada was left asking why. This is Northern Nightmares, true stories from the dark corners of Canada. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, sometimes the monsters we fear are the ones we think we know.